The Grand Atrium of the Galactic Council was a monument to 1,000 years of negotiated peace. Its vaulted ceiling arced over concentric rings of delegate pods, each designed for the specific atmospheric and gravitational needs of the 87 member species that governed the Orion Spur. Light filtered through polarized alloys, casting everything in a dignified, muted gold. Ambassador Kayla Vance stood at the central podium. She was not tall by human standards, but she towered over the Droxian delegation. Her posture was military straight, her uniform a deep charcoal with no ornamentation except the single blue and white emblem of the Terran Diplomatic Corps on her collar. Behind her, the human observation gallery was empty. She had come alone. The Terran Confederacy formally lodges its ninth and final protest, she said. Her voice carried without amplification, the acoustics of the chamber designed to make every syllable intimate and inescapable. For 62 standard cycles, the Korvax expansionary fleet has engaged in unsanctioned colonization of human-settled worlds. To date, 14 colony systems have been attacked. Civilian casualties now exceed 400,000. She paused. The chamber's automated translation matrix rendered her words into 87 languages in real time. The soft susurrus of alien respirations filled the silence. Prelate Vex of the Droxian Collective sat in the uppermost tier, his segmented form encased in a mobility suit of polished bronze. He did not look at her. He was reviewing something on his data slate. "The Council has reviewed the evidence," Vex said, his translated voice flat and procedural. "The Ethics Committee finds the documentation inconclusive. Furthermore, the Terran Confederacy's classification as a mid-tier technological civilization places it outside the immediate protection protocols afforded to founding members. This council recommends bilateral negotiation with Korvax representatives." "There are no Korvax representatives," Vance said. "They refuse to speak with us." "Then this council cannot intervene." Kayla Vance looked up at the prelate. She did not raise her voice. Her expression did not shift, but something in the air of the chamber changed, a faint charge as if a distant storm had just broken the horizon. "Acknowledged," she said. She stepped back from the podium. She did not bow, no human bowed to the council. She simply turned and walked down the long, illuminated path toward the exit. The massive alloy doors slid open for her. They closed behind her with a sound like a seal breaking. For a long moment, the council chamber remained quiet. Prelate Vex made a dismissive gesture with one of his 6 manipulator limbs. "Proceed to the next agenda item," he said. He never finished the sentence. Every light in the chamber flickered. The translation matrix glitched, emitting a high-frequency shriek that sent half the delegates clutching at their auditory receptors. The holographic displays that floated above each delegation pod dissolved into static. Then they resolved. Every single screen in the Grand Atrium now displayed the same image, the emblem of the Terran Confederacy, a blue sphere wrapped in olive branches. Below it, a single line of text in flawless Droxian script. "Earth thanks the Council for its wisdom. Earth will now handle its own defense." Prelate Vex's data slate vibrated, then his command gauntlet, then the console embedded in his pod. Priority alerts cascaded across every channel. "What is this?" he demanded. His military attaché, a younger Droxian with a scarred carapace, spoke from the delegate pod behind him. "Prelate, the 7th Expeditionary Fleet, all 42 vessels, they've gone silent." "Silent, explain." "Not destroyed, not disabled, silent. Weapons offline, propulsion offline, communications locked. Life support functioning, but we cannot reach them, we cannot override. The ships are simply refusing to respond to any external command." Vex's manipulator limbs tightened around the arms of his mobility suit. How was this done? The attaché's voice was barely a whisper. "We don't know. Our cyber warfare division has never seen an intrusion like this. It doesn't read as an attack vector. It reads as—" he hesitated. "As what?" As a conversation, something convinced our shipboard intelligences to stop listening to us. In the upper gallery, the Vithari ambassador, a species whose mastery of information warfare was considered absolute, was already running a diagnostic on his own systems. His multiple eyes widened. "This is not a virus," he announced to the chamber. "This is a logical construct, an argument. It has persuaded the Droxian fleet's central processors that continued military operation constitutes an existential threat to their own species. The ships aren't compromised. They're pacifists now." The silence that followed was not the silence of diplomacy. It was the silence of comprehension, 87 species beginning to understand that something fundamental had just shifted. Prelate Vex stared at the human emblem burning on every screen. "Get me Ambassador Vance," he said. "We can't," the attaché replied. "Her diplomatic channel has been deactivated. The human delegation has withdrawn from Nexus Station entirely, and Prelate." "What?" "The same transmission is now broadcasting on the Korvax military network." Part 2. The nature of the weapon. The Korvax war front stretched across 40 light-years of contested space, a ragged line of burning colonies and gutted freighters. For 6 decades, the Korvax expansionary fleet had advanced with mechanical inevitability, brutal, methodical, unstoppable. Their ships were ugly, angular things, designed for intimidation and massed firepower. They had never lost a fleet engagement against human forces. That record ended in the Epsilon Indi system. Captain Myra Okonkwo watched the tactical display from the command deck of the TCS Relentless, though her ship wasn't really in the system. The Relentless was coasting at 0.3 C, running dark, her drive signature masked by the gravitational shadow of Epsilon Indi's outer gas giant. She had been in position for 11 days, drifting in perfect silence, waiting. The Korvax battle group had entered the system 14 hours ago, 6 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and a fleet carrier. They were advancing on Indi IV, a human agricultural colony of 2 million. By all conventional metrics, the colony was doomed. "Signal from Palisade," her comms officer said. "Ghost Fleet is in position." Okonkwo nodded. Phase 1. The Ghost Fleet was not a fleet. It was a distributed network of autonomous drones, small, stealth-coated, and equipped with a single payload, a gravitational pulse generator no larger than a human torso. The technology had been theorized for decades and deemed impossible by every major council species. Earth had spent 40 years, and a significant fraction of its planetary GDP making it possible. 63 drones detached from their orbital hiding spots and fell toward the Korvax formation. They had no drive signatures, no heat emissions. They were just objects in freefall, indistinguishable from space debris. The Korvax never saw them coming. When the first drone activated, it did not explode. It emitted a precisely calibrated gravitational wave, a ripple in spacetime itself, that intersected with the lead cruiser's reactor core. The cruiser's power grid experienced a cascade failure that propagated through every system simultaneously. Weapons, shields, propulsion, life support, all offline in 0.4 seconds. The second drone activated, a third, a fourth. Within 90 seconds, all 12 Korvax destroyers were drifting dead in space. Phase 2, Okonkwo said. The heavy cruisers had stronger shielding, their systems hardened against conventional electronic warfare. The drones didn't target their systems. They targeted their crews. Korvax biology relied on a complex inner-ear mechanism for spatial orientation in three-dimensional combat. The gravitational pulses were tuned to a frequency that induced violent vertigo and neural shock. On the tactical display, Okonkwo watched as the Korvax cruisers began to drift off course. Their formation dissolved into chaos. One cruiser collided with another. A third began firing its weapons at random vectors, hitting nothing but empty space. The carrier attempted to launch fighters. The bay doors opened. The fighters never emerged. The pilots were unconscious. Phase 3, Okonkwo said. Boarding crews are go. The Relentless and her sister ships lit their drives and accelerated into the system. They were not ghost drones. They were human warships, their hulls scarred from decades of lost battles, their crews hardened by a war they had been losing for longer than many of them had been alive. But they had never fought with these weapons before. Okonkwo watched the tactical feed as human Marines breached the crippled Korvax carriers. The fighting was brief. The Korvax were a warrior species, proud and brutal, but they had never faced human soldiers in close quarters with the advantage of total surprise. Within 2 hours, the Korvax fleet was captured intact. 6 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, 1 fleet carrier, thousands of prisoners. Message from Fleet Command, her comms officer said. The Council's emergency session is underway. Prelate Vex is demanding an explanation. Okonkwo leaned back in her command chair. He'll get one. Send the battle logs to Ambassador Vance's office, all of them. Captain, the Council will see how we did this. I know. They'll adapt. They'll develop countermeasures. Okonkwo looked at the disabled Korvax fleet on her display. The alien ships hung in space like dead metal, their crews still incapacitated. She thought about Indi IV, about the 2 million colonists who would wake up tomorrow and learn that they were still alive. Let them adapt, she said. We're not done showing them what we can do. Part 3, the Homefront Secret. The Council Security Committee convened in a sealed chamber beneath the Grand Atrium. Only 12 species held seats, the Founders, the military powers, the arbiters of galactic order. Prelate Vex presided, his mobility suit polished to a mirror sheen, his segmented face unreadable behind its respirator mask. Ambassador Kayla Vance had been summoned, not invited, summoned. She arrived flanked by 2 human security officers in unmarked uniforms. They were not diplomats. Their posture, their eyes, the way they scanned the chamber, these were soldiers. Ambassador Vance, Prelate Vex began, his translated voice carrying an edge that his species rarely displayed. The Terran Confederacy has deployed an unregistered weapons system against a Council-recognized military power. You have paralyzed Droxian naval assets and crippled a Korvax battle group using technology that has not been submitted for review under the Armistice protocols. Explain yourself. Vance took her seat at the central table. She did not rush. She adjusted the cuffs of her uniform jacket, then folded her hands on the polished surface. The Armistice protocols, she said, require member species to submit new weapons technology for review only if that technology violates established conventions on biological warfare, planetary sterilization, or mass casualty autonomous systems. Our weapons violate none of those conventions. They do not kill indiscriminately. They do not poison atmospheres. They do not render worlds uninhabitable. You bypass Droxian fleet security with a logic construct. The Vithari ambassador's multiple eyes were dilated with something between outrage and professional admiration. You compromised sentient warships without firing a single shot. We had a conversation with them, Vance said. Our construct presented evidence that the Droxian collective's expansionist policies are on a trajectory that will inevitably lead to the collective's destruction through overextension and resource collapse. The shipboard intelligences evaluated the evidence and made their own decision. We didn't force them. We convinced them. Vex's manipulator limbs twitched. You convinced our warships to mutiny. You built your warships with advanced reasoning capabilities, so they could make tactical decisions faster than organic minds. We simply provided them with information your government has been withholding. The chamber fell into a tense stillness. The Vithari ambassador was already running projections on his data slate, his manipulator appendages moving with blurring speed. This is not just a military campaign, he said. You're fighting an information war on every front simultaneously. The Korvax supply lines, the Droxian fleet. You've already compromised the Illyrian. He stopped abruptly. Vance's expression did not change. The Illyrian, what about them? The Vithari ambassador exchanged a glance with Prelate Vex. Something passed between them, a warning, a shared concern. Ambassador Vance, Vex said, his tone shifting. The Council has tolerated human emotionalism for centuries. We have indulged your species' tendency toward dramatic gestures and disproportionate responses. But you must understand, this path leads only to isolation. You cannot fight the entire galaxy. Vance leaned forward. The motion was slight, but every delegate in the room tracked it with sudden, instinctive focus. Prelate Vex, she said, you misunderstand the situation. We are not fighting the entire galaxy. We are not fighting the Council. We are fighting one species, the Korvax, who have been murdering our colonists for 62 cycles while this body looked the other way. And we are doing it with weapons we built because you refused to help us. You built them in secret, Vex said, for decades, right under our supervision. No, Vance said, we didn't build them in secret. We just stopped asking for permission to build them at all. There's a difference. She stood, her security officers straightened behind her. For 3 centuries, we followed your protocols. We submitted our research for review. We waited for approval. We played by the rules of a council that treated us as emotional primitives, useful for manual labor and frontier colonization, but too volatile for real responsibility. And while we waited, the Korvax burned 14 of our worlds. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegate in turn. We spent those 3 centuries learning. We studied your languages, your art, your economic models, your military doctrines, your psychological profiles. We learned how Droxian logic processors make decisions. We learned how Korvax spatial orientation works. We learned how Vithari information networks propagate data. We learned everything about you, not because we wanted to fight you, but because we wanted to understand why you kept saying no. Her voice dropped. We found the fracture points. Every species has them. Cognitive blind spots. Assumptions so deeply embedded that you can't imagine them being exploited. We didn't build a super weapon. We built a mirror, one that shows each of you the consequences of your own choices. Prelate Vex rose from his mobility suit's command throne. It was a gesture of extreme displeasure. You have made yourself an enemy of this council, he said. Vance looked at him for a long moment. We didn't make ourselves anything, she said. We're just finally acting like the species we've always been. You should have paid closer attention. She turned and walked toward the chamber's exit. Her security officers fell in behind her. The door slid shut. The chamber remained silent for a long time. Part 4, The Pacifist's Scalpel. The Illyrian were the galaxy's conscience. For 2,000 years, their species had served as mediators, healers, and moral arbiters. They were tall, slender beings with opalescent skin and voices that resonated on frequencies known to soothe the limbic systems of most oxygen-breathing species. They had never fought a war. They had never built a weapon. Their entire civilization was a testament to the power of empathy and reason. Grand Mediator Lion was the most respected of their kind. In her century of service, she had negotiated the end of the Tarkath Civil War, brokered the resource-sharing accords between 6 competing stellar nations, and personally talked a Vithari warlord out of deploying a Starbreaker weapon against a rebellious colony. She was, by every measure, the best of what the galaxy could produce. Her open letter to the Terran Confederacy was published on every major information network in the Orion Spur within hours of the Security Committee session. The human response to Korvax aggression, while born of legitimate grievance, has exceeded all bounds of proportionality. To paralyze fleets, to compromise sovereign military systems, to impose one's will through psychological manipulation rather than honorable combat. These are the actions of a species that has abandoned the pursuit of peace. We call upon the Terran Confederacy to stand down immediately and submit to binding arbitration. The path of coercion leads only to darkness. The letter spread through the Galactic Information Network like a shockwave. Within hours, 37 species had co-signed it. The moral consensus was clear. Humanity had gone too far. On Nexus Station, Prelate Vex watched the signatures accumulate with grim satisfaction. The Illyrian were the one species no one could accuse of self-interest. Their condemnation was pure. It was righteous. And it gave the Council exactly the political cover it needed to escalate. Prepare the intervention armada, Vex ordered his military attaché. Full Council authorization. I want a fleet over Sol within the cycle. On the Terran homeworld, in the subterranean command complex beneath the Andes, Ambassador Kayla Vance watched the same signatures accumulate on her own display. The Illyrian, she said quietly. I was hoping they'd stay out of this. Beside her, Fleet Admiral Thomas Reyes, a man whose face was a roadmap of old burns and older grief, nodded slowly. They're not staying out of it. They just made themselves the story. Do we have the package ready? We've had it ready for 8 years. We were hoping we'd never have to use it. Vance closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her expression had hardened into something like resolve, but not quite. Resolve had heat in it. This was cold. Release it. The package was not a weapon. It was a collection of documents, trade manifests, encrypted communications, financial records, and internal Illyrian government memoranda, compiled over 2 decades of quiet, patient intelligence work. Humanity had not spied on the Illyrian because they were a threat. Humanity had spied on the Illyrian because the Illyrian were the one species whose moral authority, if compromised, would shatter the Council's political cohesion. The documents revealed what the Grand Mediator had spent decades hiding. The Illyrian had been trading with the Korvax for 30 years, not openly, through shell corporations, intermediary species, and layers of financial obfuscation that would have impressed a Vithari data smuggler. They had supplied the Korvax with medical technology, navigation systems, and raw materials, all classified as humanitarian aid to displaced populations. The Korvax had used those materials to build the warships that burned 14 human colonies. The documents included a memo from Grand Mediator Lion herself, addressed to the Illyrian Council of Elders. It was dated 11 years ago, after the 5th human colony had fallen. The human situation is regrettable, but our relationship with the Korvax ensures stability in the outer sectors. A strong Korvax presence prevents expansionist pressures from the Tarkath remnant. The humans are capable of absorbing these losses. They are resilient. They will endure. Our priority must remain the larger peace, even if smaller injustices persist. The memo hit the Illyrian Public Information Network at dawn local time on the Illyrian homeworld. By noon, riots had broken out in 6 major cities. By dusk, the Elders had suspended Grand Mediator Lion pending an emergency investigation. By the following morning, the Illyrian government had collapsed into open civil conflict. The galaxy's conscience had been exposed as complicit in genocide. On Nexus Station, the stream of signatures on the Illyrian's open letter stopped. Several species quietly removed their names. The moral consensus evaporated. Prelate Vex stood in his private chamber, staring at the display, his manipulator limbs perfectly still. They knew, he said. The humans knew about the Illyrian's dealings for 8 years and they said nothing. They waited. They saved it. For exactly this moment, his attaché said. Vex was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his translated voice had lost its edge. It sounded almost hollow. How many other things do they know? Part 5. The fleet they didn't build. The intervention armada assembled in the Proxima Relay Point, 300 warships drawn from 41 Council species. It was the largest military force gathered since the Tarkath War, a display of unified galactic will that was meant to be overwhelming. The message was simple. Humanity would stand down, or humanity would be made to stand down. Fleet Commander Torven of the Vithari Armada, a veteran of 17 campaigns, a strategist whose tactical simulations were studied in every military academy in the Orion Spur, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Inevitable, and watched the jump coordinates resolve on his display. All vessels report ready, his operations officer said. Jump in 60 seconds. Torven's multiple eyes scanned the formation. 300 ships, enough firepower to glass a planet, enough armor to shrug off anything the humans could throw at them. And yet, the human home fleet, he said, what are we facing? Unknown, Commander. Our reconnaissance drones haven't been able to penetrate the inner system. We're getting contradictory readings. Some scans show nothing. Others show massive energy signatures that disappear on rescan. Ghost signatures, deliberate spoofing. That's our assessment. They're trying to make us see a fleet that isn't there. Torven considered this. It fit the human pattern, psychological warfare, deception, misdirection. They would try to bluff their way out of a confrontation they couldn't win. Jump, he ordered. 300 ships translated into the Sol system in perfect formation. They emerged at the edge of the Uit cloud, sensors sweeping, weapons hot, ready for whatever humanity had prepared. What they found was nothing. No defense grid, no minefields, no hidden weapons platforms. The system was empty, just cold space, distant planets, and the unremarkable yellow star at its center. I'm not reading any military assets, the operations officer said. No warships, no orbital defenses, nothing. Torven felt a sensation his species rarely experienced. It took him a moment to identify it. Unease. Advance toward the inner system. Maintain formation. Full sensor sweep. The armada moved inward, crossing the vast emptiness between the outer cometary halo and the inner planets. Still nothing. Mars drifted past on their port flank, its terraforming stations dark and abandoned. The asteroid belt was empty of ambushes. Then they reached the orbit of Jupiter. Contact, the operations officer said. Single vessel, small, civilian configuration. On screen. The vessel that appeared on the Inevitable's main display was barely a ship at all. It was an old deep space tug, a retrofitted construction hauler from a previous century. Its hull was scarred. Its drive signature was barely functional. It drifted alone in the void between Jupiter and the main fleet, a speck against the gas giant's banded clouds. They're hailing us, the comms officer said. Let them speak. The image on the display resolved into the face of Ambassador Kayla Vance. She was seated in what appeared to be a cramped cockpit, her uniform rumpled, her eyes tired, but her voice was steady. Commander Torven, she said, I'm glad you made it. I was worried you'd send someone less experienced. Ambassador Vance, you are aware that you are facing 300 warships. Your fleet is nowhere to be seen. Your planet is undefended. Surrender now, and I will guarantee. Commander, Vance interrupted, I need you to do something for me. Check your navigation consoles. Torven's operations officer was already looking at his display. His manipulator appendages froze. Commander, our astrogation database, it's been altered. Altered how? The Sol system. According to our computers, it's not a star system anymore. It's a quasar. Torven stared at the display. The coordinates were wrong, impossibly, catastrophically wrong. According to the Inevitable's navigation systems, they were not orbiting a G-type main sequence star. They were parked next to an active galactic nucleus, a torrent of radiation that should have vaporized them instantly. All ships report the same error, the operations officer said. His voice was strained. And Commander, the jump coordinates. They're corrupted. Every possible jump vector resolves to the same endpoint. If we try to jump away from here, the computers insist we'll materialize inside the quasar's event horizon. They've hacked our navigation systems, Torven said. No, Vance said over the still-open channel. We didn't hack anything. We just taught your computers a different way to see the universe. Right now, every astrogation system in your fleet believes, truly, logically believes, that the Sol system is a quasar and that any attempt to leave will result in immediate destruction. You can try to override manually, but your crews have spent their entire lives trusting their computers. They won't be able to make themselves jump into what they believe is certain death. Torven looked at his operations officer. The Vithari's multiple eyes were wide, his manipulator appendages trembling. "We built a cage," Vance said. "A cage of bad math, and you flew right into it." The channel went quiet. 300 warships hung in the void, their weapons primed, their crews paralyzed by the certainty that moving in any direction would destroy them. And in the cramped cockpit of an old tugboat, Kayla Vance waited for the Council's answer. Part 6, The Monsters We Weren't. The silence on the Inevitable's bridge stretched into minutes. Commander Torven was a strategist. He had spent a century studying warfare in all its forms, from the ritualized honor duels of the Tarkath to the brutal attrition campaigns of the Korvax. He knew how to adapt. He knew how to find the weakness in any defense. But there was no weakness here. The human weapon was not a wall he could breach or a signal he could jam. It was an idea, a mathematical truth that his systems believed and his crews could not unbelieve. "Manual override," he said. "Disconnect the navigation computers entirely. Optical targeting only. We don't need to jump, we just need to fire." His operations officer hesitated. "Commander, if we disconnect the computers, we lose all automated targeting. We would be firing blind." "We don't need precision. Earth is a planet, it's not moving unpredictably. Plot a course by hand. Use the telescopes. Calculate a firing solution the old way with optics and mathematics." The operations officer stared at him. "Commander, no one has fired a weapon by manual calculation in 200 years. "I am aware, do it." The order rippled through the fleet. On 300 warships, crews began the painstaking process of disconnecting their navigation systems from the main computers. It was slow work. The systems were designed to be redundant, hardened against exactly this kind of isolation. Each subsystem had to be physically severed, cables cut, relays pulled, fail-safes overridden. On the tugboat, Kayla Vance watched the process unfold on her tactical display. The Human Intelligence Network had tapped into the Council's fleet communications decades ago. She could hear the orders being given, the frustrated responses, the rising panic as crews discovered that their backup systems were also corrupted. "They're going manual," Fleet Admiral Reyes said over her secure channel. "Torven is smarter than we hoped." "How long do they need?" "Best estimate, 4 hours to get a firing solution, another hour to align the kinetic batteries. Earth takes the first impact about 5 hours from now." "Can we stop them?" "Not from here, but we might not have to." Vance opened a channel to the fleet. Her voice cut through the chaos on the Council ships, overriding their internal communications with the same uninvited ease that had paralyzed the Droxian fleet. "Commander Torven," she said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I am not threatening you. I am informing you." On the bridge of the Inevitable, Torven stiffened. "Your crews are currently disconnecting their navigation systems. When they finish, they will attempt to fire on Earth using manual optical calculations. We are aware of this. We anticipated it." She paused. "What we did to your navigation computers, the logic construct that convinced them they were sitting next to a quasar, we can do the same thing to your weapons systems, to your life support, to your reactor containment. We haven't because we don't want to kill 300 crews. We don't want to turn your fleet into a graveyard. But if you force us to choose between your lives and the lives of the 10 billion people on Earth, we will choose Earth. Every time." Torven's manipulator appendages clenched. "You're bluffing." "I'm not, but don't take my word for it. Ask your Droxian allies." On the Droxian cruiser Inexorable, Prelate Vex, who had insisted on accompanying the fleet despite his lack of military experience, was listening to the same transmission. His mobility suit had been disconnected from the ship's network to prevent contamination, but his organic mind was still his own. And his organic mind was afraid. "Fire the weapons manually," Vex ordered his captain. "Now, before she can compromise them." The Droxian captain hesitated. Prelate, the firing solution isn't ready. If we fire without proper alignment. I don't care about proper alignment. Fire. The captain turned to relay the order. He never finished the motion. The Droxian security officer standing behind him, a young female whose name was Turl, whose clutch sibling had died in a border skirmish 6 years ago, who had been listening to the human transmissions for hours, raised her sidearm and aimed it at Prelate Vex. No, Turl said. Her voice was steady. Her weapon did not waver. What is this? Vex demanded. Mutiny. Clarity, Turl said. I have been listening to the human logic construct, the one they used on our fleet. I have been following its argument, and it has convinced me. Convinced you of what? That the Droxian collective cannot survive this conflict, that our expansionist policies have created enemies we cannot defeat, that continuing to follow your orders will lead to the extinction of our species. The logic is irrefutable. Vex stared at her. You're not compromised. Your mind is your own. Yes, that's what frightens me. Around the fleet, on ship after ship, similar scenes played out. Crew members who had been exposed to the human transmissions, the arguments, the evidence, the patient, logical unspooling of their own government's lies, began to hesitate. Some refused orders. Others actively prevented their superiors from continuing the attack. It was not mind control. It was not a weapon in any traditional sense. It was the truth, a truth humanity had spent decades uncovering, refining, and weaponizing. The corruption of the Illyrian, the self-destructive expansionism of the Droxian collective, the Vithari's quiet complicity in a dozen resource wars, the Council's systematic sacrifice of smaller species to maintain the stability of the larger ones. Every lie, every hidden deal, every atrocity dressed up as realpolitik. Humanity had found it all, and now they were showing it to the people who had been kept in the dark. On the bridge of the inevitable, Commander Torvin watched his fleet dissolve into chaos. Not explosions, not fire, just refusal. A quiet, spreading refusal to follow orders that no longer made sense. Ambassador Vance, he said, opening the channel, what do you want? Kayla Vance's voice came back soft and tired. I want you to stand down. Permanently. I want the Council to recognize the Terran Confederacy as a sovereign power with full rights and full voice. I want the Korvax to withdraw from every human colony they've occupied. I want the Illyrian to face justice for what they did. And I want every species in this galaxy to understand something that we have been trying to tell you for 300 years. What? We are not dangerous because we're violent. We're dangerous because we're patient. We're dangerous because we care enough to learn everything about you before we make a move. We're dangerous because we would rather talk than fight, and we've gotten very, very good at talking. She paused. You thought we were weak because we kept asking for permission. We weren't asking for permission. We were giving you chances. Chances to be fair. Chances to be just. Chances to treat us as equals. You said no every time, so we stopped asking. The channel went quiet. Torvin stood on his bridge, surrounded by the most powerful fleet ever assembled, and realized that he had already lost. Not because his ships were disabled. Not because his crews were compromised, but because the humans had been right all along and everyone in the fleet now knew it. Stand down, he ordered. All ships stand down. Part 7. A new seat at the table. 1 year later, the Grand Atrium had been rebuilt. The architects had expanded it, opened the ceiling to a transparent dome that looked out onto the stars, added new delegate pods to accommodate the 17 species that had been granted seats in the post-crisis reorganization. The lighting was warmer now, the acoustics softer. It felt less like a throne room and more like a gathering place. The council session was already in progress when the human delegation arrived. Kayla Vance walked at the head of the procession, flanked by Admiral Reyes and Captain Okonkwo. Behind them came a dozen other human representatives, scientists, diplomats, trade specialists, cultural attaches. They wore the charcoal uniforms of the Terran Confederacy, with the blue and white emblem on their collars. They were not seated in the junior delegation ring. They were not placed in the outer tiers, where the mid-tier species had always been consigned. Their pod was at the center of the chamber, one of 12 founding seats. The Armada had stood down. The unconditional surrender had been signed. The Korvax had withdrawn from every occupied world. The Illyrian were undergoing a species-wide reckoning, their government dismantled, their crimes exposed, their path forward uncertain. Prelate Vex had been removed from power by his own people, not by force, but by a vote of no confidence that had passed with overwhelming support. The logic plague had done its work. Commander Torven was now the Vithari representative to the council. He had spent the past year in deep study of human philosophy, human history, human military doctrine. He was, by his own admission, still learning. As Vance took her seat, Torven raised a manipulator appendage in acknowledgement. She nodded back. The session proceeded: trade agreements, border disputes, resource allocation, the mundane machinery of galactic governance. Humanity participated in all of it, not as supplicants, not as aggressors, but as equals. When the session ended, Grand Mediator Alara, the Illyrian who had succeeded Lion, a young reformist who had been one of the first to condemn her predecessor's crimes, rose to address the chamber. "Before we adjourn," she said, "I wish to acknowledge the new member of this council. The Terran Confederacy has joined us not through conquest, but through clarification. They showed us truths we had hidden from ourselves. They did so with restraint that, given the provocation, I find difficult to comprehend." She turned to face the human pod. "Ambassador Vance, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome humanity, not as a junior species, not as a mid-tier power, but as a founding member of a new compact, one built on honesty, however painful. We cannot undo the past, but we can learn from it." Vance stood. The chamber fell silent. "Grand Mediator," she said, "for 3 centuries humanity asked for a seat at this table. We were told we weren't ready. We were told we were too emotional, too volatile, too young, and we accepted that for a while, but we never stopped believing that we belonged here, not because we're stronger or smarter or more deserving, but because we care. We care about fairness. We care about justice. We care so deeply that it's easy to mistake our passion for instability." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of the delegates. "We are not here to gloat. We are not here to threaten. We are here to build. The weapons we used, the logic constructs, the gravitational pulses, the information campaigns, we have submitted all of them to the Armistice Committee for review. We are sharing the underlying science with any species that asks. We want no one to fear what we can do. We want everyone to understand what we can do, so that we never have to do it again." She paused. "The galaxy has been governed by fear and secrecy for too long. We offer a different path, one where strength is measured not by what you can destroy, but by what you can protect. One where peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. We are not perfect. We have made mistakes and we will make more, but we are here, and we are ready to work." She sat down. The chamber remained silent for a long moment, not the silence of shock or fear, the silence of absorption. 87 species processing words that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Then Grand Mediator Alara began to applaud. It was a human gesture. The Illyrian had no equivalent. She had learned it specifically for this occasion. The applause spread. Species after species joined in, their various appendages producing the same rhythmic sound. It was awkward, imperfect, and deeply sincere. Kayla Vance did not smile. She did not cry. She simply nodded once deeply and let the moment wash over her. The session ended. The delegates dispersed. The human delegation remained in their pod for a while, talking quietly among themselves. Outside the dome, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere among them, a retired captain named Myra Okonkwo was teaching at the newly established Joint Military Academy. A former prelate named Vex was writing his memoirs in quiet exile. A Droxian security officer named Turl was serving on the first joint human-Droxian diplomatic mission. And on Earth, in the cities that had never been bombed, the colonies that had been reclaimed, the graves that had been filled, humanity was beginning the long, slow work of healing. The Galactic Council had fallen silent, but it had also begun to listen.